The airport was louder than he remembered. Rolling suitcases rattled across the floor. Announcements echoed from the ceiling, and people rushed past as if every second mattered. He stood near the boarding gate with a small backpack over one shoulder and his daughter's hand tightly held in his own. She was still half asleep, her head leaning against his arm, her eyes heavy but curious. It had been a long morning already, and the sun had barely risen. He had not flown in years. Since his wife passed away, life had been about routines, school mornings, packed lunches, and late nights, working whatever shifts he could find. This trip was different. It was the first time he had left their city since everything changed. A job interview waited on the other side of this flight, one that could mean steady income and fewer nights worrying about rent. He did not talk about it much, especially not to his daughter, but inside he carried both hope and fear. At the check-in counter earlier, something unexpected had happened. The airline agent frowned at her screen, tapped the keyboard twice, then smiled politely. She explained there had been a seating issue, and to make up for it, they were upgrading him to first class. He did not fully understand what that meant at first. He had never paid attention to seat classes before. Flying was flying. Still, when the agent handed over the new boarding passes, he noticed the different color and the words printed clearly at the top. First class. He felt uncomfortable accepting it. His clothes were clean but worn. His shoes had been repaired more than once. He looked down at his daughter, who smiled when she saw his confused face. She thought it was funny. He decided not to question it. Maybe for once, something simple had gone right. Now, as boarding time approached, people gathered around the gate. Some stood close, others sat nearby, staring at phones or sipping coffee. He guided his daughter to a row of empty seats and crouched in front of her. "Stay close," he said softly. "We'll get on soon." She nodded and swung her legs, humming to herself. That was when he noticed the woman. She stood a few steps away, one hand resting on her lower back, the other gripping the handle of a small carry-on. Her belly was clearly visible beneath a loose coat. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her face calm but tired. There were no empty seats near her. People passed by without looking, too busy or too used to ignoring discomfort that wasn't theirs. He watched her for a moment. She tried to stand straight, then leaned slightly against the wall. Her breathing changed, slow but careful, as if every movement required planning. He looked around again. Still no seats. The gate area was full. A memory crossed his mind without warning. His wife, late in her pregnancy, standing in line at a store while he searched for a chair. The way she smiled and said she was fine, even when he knew she was not. He stood up. "Come on," he said to his daughter. "Let's move." She followed him without question. He walked toward the woman and stopped a respectful distance away. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Would you like to sit?" The woman looked surprised. For a second, she seemed unsure if he was speaking to her. Then she smiled, warm but hesitant. "Oh, thank you," she said. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to take your seat." "It's okay," he replied. "We can stand for a bit." Before she could argue again, he placed his backpack under the seat and helped his daughter sit down. The woman thanked him once more and lowered herself carefully into the chair. Relief crossed her face just for a moment before she composed herself. His daughter looked up at him. "Daddy, why don't you sit?" He smiled. "I'm fine." She accepted that answer easily. Children often did. Soon after, boarding was announced. First-class passengers were invited to line up first. He glanced at his boarding pass again, almost forgetting about it. He hesitated, then guided his daughter toward the line. This time, the pregnant woman was right in front of them. A flight attendant approached, smiling professionally. "Welcome." "May I see your boarding passes?" He handed them over. The attendant looked down, then back up, then down again. "Sir, these seats are in first class." "Yes," he said simply. She nodded and turned to the woman ahead. "And yours as well, ma'am." They began walking down the jet bridge. The hallway felt narrow, filled with the low sound of footsteps and rolling bags. His daughter squeezed his hand tighter, her excitement growing. Inside the plane, first class looked nothing like he expected. The seats were wide and spaced far apart. Everything looked calm and quiet, like a different world. His daughter's eyes widened. "Wow," she whispered. He swallowed Dot as they reached their row. He noticed the woman's seat number. It was directly across the aisle from his. She paused, looking at her boarding pass, then at him. "This is my seat," she said. He nodded. "Mine too." "Well, not yours, but—" He stopped, unsure how to explain. She seemed confused. The flight attendant stepped in, checking again. "There's been no mistake," the attendant said. "Both seats are correct." He took a breath. "Actually," he said, turning to the attendant, "she can have mine." The woman's eyes widened. "No, that's not necessary. You already gave me your seat outside." "It's okay," he repeated. "She needs it more than I do." The attendant looked surprised. "Sir, this is a first-class seat. I know." His daughter tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy?" He knelt down to her level. "We're going to sit somewhere else for this flight. It'll still be okay." She looked around, then back at him. "Together?" "Always," he said. The woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I can't take that from you." He shook his head. "You're not taking anything. I'm giving it." The flight attendant waited, unsure how to respond. Other passengers began to notice. A man nearby raised his eyebrows. Someone else whispered Dot finally. The woman nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. He smiled once, then turned away. The attendant guided him and his daughter toward economy class. The seats were closer together, the aisle tighter. He placed their bags overhead and helped his daughter into the window seat. She looked disappointed for just a second, then pressed her face against the glass. "Look," she said. "The planes are moving." He sat beside her, relief washing over him. He had expected regret, maybe even frustration. Instead, he felt calm. Dot as the plane prepared for takeoff. He glanced forward, just once. The woman in first class was buckled in, her hands resting on her belly. She looked back and caught his eye. She gave a small nod, full of meaning. He nodded back, then turned his attention to his daughter as the engines roared and the plane lifted into the sky. He had no idea that this simple choice, made without thought of reward, was about to change their lives forever. Once they settled into their seats, the father took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. Economy class was different, crowded and noisy. People shifted in their seats. Some complained quietly about the space, and children in other rows played or fussed. But the father found a quiet corner in his mind and focused on his daughter. She pressed her face to the small window, watching the clouds grow and shrink as the plane climbed higher. He smiled at her excitement, trying to ignore the discomfort he felt in his own body. First class had been soft, spacious, and quiet. Economy was tighter, the seats less forgiving. His back ached, but he would manage. He always had Dot as the flight continued. He kept himself busy. He helped his daughter with her snacks, made sure she had her water, and tried to distract her from the long flight. She giggled when he made faces at the little toy she had brought, and he felt his heart lift. She was adjusting quickly, far quicker than he expected. Meanwhile, he noticed passengers around him. Some were polite, some indifferent. One woman dropped her book and struggled to reach it. Without thinking, he bent and handed it back. She smiled and thanked him quietly. He nodded, not wanting attention. In the first-class section, the pregnant woman sat comfortably. He glanced over once or twice when he thought she might notice him. He wondered who she really was, why she traveled alone, and what her life must be like. Her calmness and the way she adjusted her seatbelt over her belly intrigued him, but he returned his attention to his daughter, keeping his mind busy. Time passed slowly. Meals were served, and he helped his daughter eat, making sure she had what she liked. Around them, the atmosphere and economy was chaotic but alive. Some people slept, some talked quietly, and some, like him, focused solely on their own little world within the plane. As he moved to help his daughter with her drink, the flight attendant passed by. She gave him a brief smile. He returned it politely, not thinking much of it. But she paused for a moment and glanced toward the first-class section. Her expression changed slightly, a mix of curiosity and surprise. He did not notice it at first. He was busy wiping crumbs off his daughter's lap and making sure she was comfortable. But later, as the plane hit a patch of turbulence, he looked up and caught her looking at him again. This time, she nodded slightly, as if she recognized something about him. He blinked and looked away quickly. He felt uneasy, as if someone had read his thoughts. He shook it off. This flight was long, and he had little energy to dwell on strangers. The turbulence ended, and the seatbelt signs turned off. People began to move about, stretching, visiting the restroom, and adjusting their seats. The father stayed seated with his daughter, letting her play quietly with a small stuffed animal. He noticed the woman in first class again, this time leaning back and closing her eyes. Something about her composure struck him. Despite the obvious physical effort of pregnancy, she seemed calm, almost serene. He remembered the look on her face when he had offered her the seat. There had been a flicker of surprise, gratitude, and maybe something else he could not place. He wondered if she remembered the gesture. Would she think he was foolish, or would she understand why he had done it? As the flight went on, he tried to read a magazine the airline had provided, but his mind wandered. He watched other passengers, thinking about their lives. There was a man reading a newspaper, a young couple talking quietly, and a mother trying to calm a crying infant. Each person had a story, a challenge, a reason for being on this flight, and he felt a quiet connection to all of them. His daughter looked up at him and asked simple questions about the clouds, the tiny towns below, and the distant mountains. He answered patiently, pointing out patterns in the clouds, the way rivers curved like ribbons, and how the sun reflected on lakes. She listened with wide eyes, hanging on to every word. He felt proud, a warm glow spreading in his chest. In a life filled with hardships, moments like this reminded him why he kept going. He wanted his daughter to see the world, even if it was through a small airplane window for now. Meanwhile, the pregnant woman had started to observe him more closely. From her vantage point in first class, she could see how he interacted with his daughter, how patient and careful he was, how he seemed to find joy in the little moments, despite discomfort and fatigue. She noticed the small gestures, the way he brushed crumbs from her lap, how he adjusted her seatbelt, how he made her laugh with simple games. It was rare to see such attention and care from someone who had so little himself. She found herself wondering who he was, what had brought him here, and why he had been willing to give up something so valuable without hesitation. There was a quiet dignity in his actions, an honesty that she did not often encounter in her world of wealth and power. She was intrigued, quietly admiring him without wanting to be noticed. The flight attendant passed again, this time bringing drinks and snacks to first-class passengers. She caught the pregnant woman's gaze briefly, a subtle nod exchanged between them. The woman smiled faintly and returned her attention to the man and his daughter, still seated in economy. She watched as he helped his daughter with her snack, laughing softly at something she said. He looked tired, but his eyes shone with care and love. The plane continued through clear skies, the sun moving steadily across the horizon. Light filtered through the windows, casting soft shadows across the cabin. The father took a deep breath, feeling the steady rhythm of the flight. There was a moment of calm, a small pocket of peace amid the movement and noise. He held his daughter's hand, felt her warmth, and realized that even in a cramped, noisy cabin, life could be quiet and good. The hours passed. Meals came and went. People slept, watched movies, or talked quietly. The father and daughter passed the time with games, stories, and shared laughter. Every so often, he glanced toward the first-class section. The woman was still there, calm and composed, observing without obvious recognition. He felt a strange sense of curiosity about her, but he did not dwell. Their lives had crossed for a brief moment, and that was enough. As the flight neared its midpoint, the father noticed something else. Other passengers began to glance toward him. A few smiled politely, others whispered quietly to each other. He did not understand at first, but then he realized that his small acts of kindness, helping his daughter, assisting others, remaining calm in a crowded plane, had been noticed. It was subtle, nothing dramatic, but it left a quiet mark on those around him. He felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. He had never sought attention or praise for his actions. Helping others was simply a part of who he was. Yet now, in the midst of strangers, he realized that kindness could be contagious. People noticed it, even if they did not always acknowledge it openly. The pregnant woman adjusted her seat, noticing the father's steady presence and unwavering attention to his daughter. There was something genuine about him, something rare. She wondered if the world had given him enough opportunities, if life had been fair, and why someone like him carried so much responsibility with such grace. She felt a growing respect and curiosity, wanting to know more about the man who had given up first class without hesitation. The flight continued, the plane slicing through clouds, the hum of the engines a constant backdrop. The father and daughter remained focused on each other, yet he could feel the subtle gaze of the woman from first class. It was not intrusive, merely observant, and it made him feel a small sense of unease mixed with curiosity. He returned his attention fully to his daughter, sharing stories about the landscapes below, imagining worlds and adventures together. The woman in first class continued to watch silently, her interest growing with every small gesture of care and patience he displayed. She had seen wealth, influence, and power, but the quiet dignity and kindness of this man left a deeper impression than any material possession ever could. As the flight entered its final hours, the father felt a quiet satisfaction. Despite the discomfort of economy, the long hours, and the fatigue, he had managed to keep his daughter happy, safe, and entertained. He had made a choice without expecting reward, without considering recognition, and in doing so, he had created a small world of peace for both of them. The pregnant woman continued to observe, reflecting on her own life, her own choices, and the unexpected encounter that had introduced a stranger into her flight. There was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something meaningful might emerge from this brief connection. Though she did not yet understand how or why the father smiled at his daughter as she yawned, her head resting against his shoulder once more. He whispered a small promise to her, a vow that no matter what, he would always care for her, protect her, and find a way to make life better. In that quiet moment, surrounded by strangers, he felt the weight of responsibility lighten just slightly, carried by the simple joy of her presence. And across the cabin, the woman in first class continued to watch, silently admiring the man who had given up so much and gained nothing, at least in material terms. But in her eyes, he had gained something far greater: respect, dignity, and the quiet knowledge that even in the smallest gestures, character shone brighter than wealth, status, or privilege. The plane had settled into a steady rhythm as it cruised above the clouds. The hum of the engines was constant, and the gentle sway of the aircraft made some passengers sleepy, while others kept themselves busy with books, devices, or conversation. The father and his daughter remained side by side in economy, sharing small moments of laughter and curiosity. She pressed her face against the window from time to time, pointing out shapes in the clouds or tiny towns far below. He indulged her, creating small stories for every twist in the landscape, finding a joy in her imagination that made the cramped seating feel almost irrelevant. It was then, during a moment of calm, that the pregnant woman in first class made her move. She had watched him for hours from afar, noting his patience, his attentiveness, the way he interacted with his daughter, and the quiet dignity with which he managed their small world. She realized she wanted to speak with him, not out of obligation, not as a form of recognition, but because she felt a genuine curiosity about the man who had given up so much without expectation. She pressed the call button, and a flight attendant approached, politely asking what she needed. After a brief exchange, the attendant looked back toward the father and nodded. Moments later, she appeared in the aisle near him, her movements careful, deliberate, as if each step mattered. He looked up, startled. His daughter looked at her curiously, but did not interrupt. The woman's presence carried a calm authority, but there was no arrogance, no pretense, only an understated warmth. "Excuse me," she said softly. "May I speak with you for a moment?" He nodded, slightly hesitant. "Of course," he replied, standing carefully to make space for her to pass. His daughter stayed seated, clutching her stuffed animal, watching quietly. They moved a few steps into the aisle, close enough to speak without raising their voices. She looked at him directly, and he noticed the faint worry lines around her eyes, the careful positioning of her hands over her belly, and the genuine interest in her gaze. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not just for giving up your seat earlier, but for how you've handled everything on this flight. I've been watching, and it's remarkable." He shifted uneasily. "It's nothing," he said, brushing it off. "I just did what felt right. My daughter's with me, and I wanted her to be comfortable." Her gaze softened, though her expression remained composed. "I understand. But not everyone would make the same choice, and certainly not everyone would do it without hesitation." He shrugged, unsure how to respond. Compliments were uncomfortable, especially ones that felt deserved. He had spent years managing life quietly, doing what he had to do without thought of recognition. She smiled faintly, sensing his modesty. "You're a good father," she said simply. "I can see it in how you interact with your daughter. Patience, kindness. That doesn't come easily to everyone." He felt a warmth in his chest, but tried to hide it. "I'm just trying to do the best I can," he said softly. "She's all I have. I can't let her down." Her expression softened even further. She understood that weight, the constant, quiet responsibility of providing, protecting, and nurturing a life that depended entirely on you. She had experienced wealth and influence, but she had also seen people fail under the pressure of responsibility. She respected the way he bore it, without complaint. They continued talking in hushed tones, sharing brief glimpses of their lives. He spoke lightly about his job, the upcoming interview, and his hopes for the future. He did not dwell on his struggles, though they were present in every word he spoke. She listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest without prying too deeply. In return, she offered little about herself, keeping her identity carefully hidden. She was not ready to reveal the truth that she owned the very plane they were on, that she moved through the world with wealth few could imagine. For now, She simply wanted to connect, to understand the man whose actions had impressed her far more than any gesture of money or status could doubt at one point. Turbulence shook the plane slightly, reminding them of the fragile environment in which they spoke. He instinctively reached to steady his daughter's arm and looked back at the woman. She nodded, understanding the instinctive care he showed without words. Time passed quickly as they talked, even amidst the background hum of the cabin and occasional chatter of other passengers. He shared stories about his daughter's favorite games, the small rituals they maintained at home, and the little victories that made life worthwhile. She responded with quiet observations, showing empathy and a rare understanding of the challenges he faced. Other passengers occasionally glanced their way, sensing a connection without understanding it. A young man nearby whispered something to his companion, pointing subtly in their direction. A flight attendant walking by gave a slight smile, acknowledging the unusual but heartwarming exchange taking place. The father remained modest, never seeking praise or recognition. He did not want anything from the woman, not even thanks. He simply wanted the flight to pass smoothly and for his daughter to be happy. Yet, he could not deny the sense of curiosity that grew with every passing minute. Who was she? Why had she singled him out? What had prompted her to speak with a stranger in this way? The woman, meanwhile, found herself reflecting on the nature of character and integrity. She had met people of all backgrounds, some rich, some poor, some powerful, some struggling, but few had exhibited the quiet strength and selflessness she observed in him. It was rare to see someone make a choice, purely out of concern for another, without thought for personal gain. It reminded her that even in a world dominated by money and influence, human decency could be more powerful than any fortune dot. As the flight continued, they exchanged small stories about family, childhood memories, and the little lessons life had taught them. Each story revealed layers of humanity, resilience, patience, hope, and love. The father's words carried the weight of experience, tempered by simplicity, while the woman's responses reflected careful thought and genuine appreciation. At one point, his daughter fell asleep, her head resting on his shoulder. He held her gently, careful not to disturb her rest. The woman observed quietly, noting the tenderness and responsibility evident in his movements. It was a small scene, ordinary in many ways, yet extraordinary in its quiet significance. The conversation continued in fragments as the flight passed. They discussed the small joys in life, the ways in which people could surprise one another with kindness, and the importance of recognizing character when it appeared unexpectedly. She found herself drawn not just to his actions, but to his philosophy, the way he seemed to navigate life with simple honesty and unwavering care. Eventually, the woman glanced at her watch, noting that the flight was moving steadily toward its destination. She knew the moment to reveal her identity had not yet arrived. There was no rush. For now, it was enough to witness the man's quiet strength and to understand the depth of his character. The father, too, felt a sense of calm he had not experienced in a long time. Talking with her, even briefly, offered a rare opportunity to connect with someone who noticed the small details, who appreciated the unspoken effort required to care for another. It was refreshing, though he did not yet understand why. As the hours continued, the cabin grew quieter. Passengers dozed or stared out the windows, lost in their own thoughts. The father sat with his daughter, resting peacefully, his mind calm despite the long journey. The woman in first class remained attentive, her gaze occasionally meeting his, not in a confrontational way, but with silent acknowledgment of the bond they had formed. However, brief it might seem to others, by the time the plane reached its final third of the journey, both of them had learned more about each other than they could have imagined. They had shared humanity, small truths, and mutual respect. Neither had revealed everything, yet the connection was undeniable. A silent understanding had developed, a recognition of integrity, patience, and the quiet courage it took to act rightly in a world that often did not reward such behavior. As they prepared for the descent, the father gently woke his daughter. She rubbed her eyes and smiled sleepily, pressing her tiny hand against his. He smiled back, feeling the familiar warmth of responsibility and love. The woman in first class watched the scene, a soft admiration in her eyes, realizing that in this small act of shared humanity, she had found something truly rare and valuable. And though the plane had many passengers, moving toward their respective destinations, a subtle thread connected these two lives. A thread woven from kindness, quiet courage, and recognition of character. A thread that in the hours to come would begin to change their worlds in ways neither could yet imagine. The plane began its slow descent, the city below growing larger and more detailed with every passing minute. Lights shimmered in the rivers and streets, cars moved like tiny ants along the roads, and buildings formed clusters that told the story of a busy, living world. Passengers adjusted in their seats, some tapping impatiently, others staring silently at the landscape, anticipating the landing. The father held his daughter's hand tightly, feeling her small grip, seeking reassurance. She was tired but alert, her curiosity mixed with the awareness that they were approaching their destination. He smiled down at her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Almost there," he whispered. "You'll see the city soon." She nodded sleepily, resting her head on his shoulder. He took a deep breath, a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. The flight had been long, crowded, and noisy, yet it had also offered unexpected moments of connection and reflection. He had managed to keep his daughter comfortable, entertained, and safe, and in doing so had found small moments of peace. From first class, the pregnant woman observed the father and his daughter. She had been watching quietly throughout the flight, but now, as the plane prepared to land, she realized the importance of the moment. It was not just the end of the flight. It was the beginning of something that could change the course of both their lives. She pressed the call button for a flight attendant, who arrived promptly. After a brief, hushed conversation, the attendant nodded and walked toward the father, gesturing for him to stand. Confused, he looked at his daughter and shrugged. "What is it, Daddy?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Let's find out," he said, standing carefully and helping her to her feet. The woman in first class made her way down the aisle toward him, her steps steady and composed despite her pregnancy. Passengers in economy glanced curiously, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Though they could not guess what. When she reached him, she smiled warmly. "Thank you for speaking with me earlier," she began. "I wanted to make sure you understood something before we landed." He nodded politely, unsure where this was leading. "Of course," he said. "I'm glad we talked." She took a deep breath, then spoke clearly, ensuring her words reached him without raising her voice. "I should tell you who I am. I own this plane. I am the owner of the company that operates it, and the first-class section you gave up, well, it's part of my private fleet." His eyes widened slightly. "Wait, you own this plane?" he asked, his voice soft with disbelief. I just thought you were another passenger." She nodded. "I wanted to travel quietly, without being noticed. But I've been watching you, and I need you to understand something. Your actions today have meant more than you can imagine. You gave up first class without hesitation. You thought of someone else, not yourself. In all my experiences, I have rarely seen that kind of character." The father felt a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. He looked down at his daughter, who was still holding his hand, and shook his head lightly. "I didn't do it for anything. I just wanted her to be comfortable. And that is exactly why it matters," she said softly. "The choices we make, the kindness we show, even when no one is watching, reveal who we truly are. You have shown patience, generosity, and selflessness. That is rare. That is what I value most." He felt his chest tighten. Words like these were unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and yet strangely validating. He had spent so many years struggling, giving, and worrying, without expectation of recognition. Now, someone who had the power to give anything money, opportunity, influence, was acknowledging the value of his character. She continued, her voice calm but firm. "I do not offer this lightly, but I want to offer you something that could change your life, something lasting, not temporary. A position within my company, full support, stability, and a place where your dedication and integrity are recognized and valued. Not for your past mistakes or misfortunes, but for who you are and the choices you make." His mind spun. He had never dreamed of an offer like this. A stable job, a future for his daughter, an environment where he and she could thrive. This was beyond any hope he had allowed himself. He opened his mouth to respond, but found words failing him. All he could do was shake his head slightly, still processing. "Why me?" He finally managed to ask. "There are so many people, so many others who—" She interrupted gently. "Because you are honest. Because you act without thought of reward. Because you care about someone other than yourself. In every interview, every resume, and every background check, that cannot be faked. You have shown me what matters more than anything else." He swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of awe, humility, and disbelief. He glanced down at his daughter, who had tilted her head slightly, sensing the importance of the moment without fully understanding it. Her small hand tightened around his, grounding him. The flight attendants and a few nearby passengers watched quietly, sensing the gravity of the interaction. Murmurs rippled through economy class, passengers noticing the attention directed at a man who had, until now, seemed ordinary. There was no resentment, only curiosity and a quiet admiration for a life lived with integrity. "Sir," she continued, "this is not charity. This is opportunity. I want to invest in you, not because you need me, but because the world needs more people like you. People who understand that real strength lies in character, not wealth." He blinked, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had spent so long struggling to provide, to protect, to do right by his daughter, and never once had he imagined that his efforts might be seen, recognized, or rewarded. And now, here was someone offering more than he had ever dared to hope for. His daughter tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Daddy?" she whispered, her small voice steady. He looked down at her and smiled, choking back a lump in his throat. "Yes, sweetheart. Everything is going to be okay." The woman smiled at them both, warmth in her eyes. "It will be more than okay. It will be a fresh start. I hope you will accept it." He nodded slowly, still trying to absorb the enormity of the offer. There was no rush, no pressure, just an invitation. A door opened because of something as simple and profound as kindness. The plane continued its descent, the city growing ever clearer beneath them. The father felt a sense of anticipation, a mixture of hope and disbelief. He had given up a seat on a plane earlier in the day, not knowing who he was helping or what might come of it. Now, that simple act of generosity had led to an opportunity that could reshape his life. He looked at his daughter, whose eyes reflected curiosity and trust. She had no idea what this meant, but she sensed her father's relief, his cautious happiness, and the calm that had returned to his voice. He whispered quietly to her, sharing a promise that was both simple and profound. "We'll be all right, darling. Everything's going to change for the better." The woman in first class watched the exchange quietly, understanding that what she had witnessed was rare a glimpse into genuine character, an act of integrity, and the potential of kindness to create lasting impact. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her own life, while filled with wealth and power, had been touched by something far more meaningful. The quiet heroism of a single father, acting selflessly, looked out of their windows at the city lights, the plane banking gently as it prepared for landing. Inside, the father and his daughter held each other close, their world suddenly larger, richer, and full of possibility. The woman in first class returned to her seat, satisfied that she had done what she could to ensure that kindness was recognized and rewarded. As the wheels touched the runway, a quiet sense of anticipation filled the cabin. The father felt a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. He had lived a life of quiet sacrifice, and now, finally, it seemed that the world might respond in kind. The plane slowed, taxiing toward the gate, carrying with it not just passengers, but stories, choices, and the unseen impact of small, selfless acts. The father guided his daughter off the plane, holding her hand tightly as they moved down the jet bridge. Every step felt surreal. Only hours earlier, he had been standing in a crowded gate, exhausted from travel and responsibilities, offering a seat to a stranger simply because it felt right. Now, that same act had led to an unexpected opportunity that could change both their lives. The airport buzzed around them. Passengers hurried to baggage claim. Families reunited, and announcements filled the air, but he felt detached from it all, focused solely on the presence of his daughter and the woman who had made the offer. She had arranged for them to meet in a quiet lounge nearby, away from the noise and chaos. As they walked through the airport, he noticed the care with which she moved, the subtle confidence in her posture, and the faint smile that never left her face. She had taken the time to observe, to understand, and to act not from impulse, but from deliberate recognition of what mattered most, character and kindness. When they entered the lounge, she gestured for them to sit. His daughter, still holding his hand, found a comfortable seat, and he sat beside her. The room was quiet, warm, and welcoming, a stark contrast to the chaos of the airport beyond the glass walls. "I wanted to make sure we had a private place to talk," she said gently. "What I have to offer isn't just about employment or money. It's about creating a space where you can provide stability for your daughter, where your efforts and integrity are valued, and where you can continue to grow." He nodded slowly, taking in every word. It was hard to comprehend. A lifetime of struggles, sleepless nights, and careful planning for the smallest victories had led to this moment, a moment where someone recognized not just what he did, but who he was. She continued, explaining the role she had in mind. It would involve responsibilities that suited his skills and experience, allowing flexibility to care for his daughter, opportunities for advancement, and education support that could benefit her as she grew. Every detail she shared was thoughtful, showing that this was not a superficial gesture, but a meaningful invitation. His mind raced. He had imagined stable employment, perhaps a slightly better salary, maybe a chance to save for the future, but this was beyond any expectation he had allowed himself. He glanced at his daughter, whose small face was full of curiosity and wonder, sensing the weight of the moment without fully understanding it. "Do you understand?" the woman asked softly. "This isn't charity. It's recognition. I want to invest in someone whose actions reflect what I value: honesty, patience, and care. Not wealth, not status, just integrity and love for another human being." He swallowed hard, words failing him once more. I don't know what to say," he admitted quietly. "I never expected none of this. I just did what I thought was right." "That is exactly why it matters," she said. "The right choices, made without expectation of reward, are the rarest and most valuable. I've met many people with wealth, with power, with influence, but few who truly understand the importance of kindness and responsibility. "You do." A silence fell over them, comfortable and thoughtful. Outside, the airport continued its constant movement, but in this small lounge, time seemed to pause. The father realized that a simple choice to give up a seat had led to this moment, bridging two very different worlds in a way he could never have anticipated. His daughter leaned against him, small and trusting, her presence grounding him. He had always worried about providing for her, about making sure she had the best possible life despite limited resources. Now, with this opportunity, he could imagine a future filled with security, education, and happiness for her, an outcome he had rarely dared to dream of. The woman watched him carefully, noting the subtle expressions of gratitude, humility, and disbelief that crossed his face. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that integrity had been recognized and rewarded, not through obligation or societal expectation, but through understanding and respect for what truly mattered. They spoke for hours, discussing practical details, hopes for the future, and the life he envisioned for his daughter. Every plan was rooted in reality, yet infused with possibility. It was not a handout, not a fleeting gift, but a sustainable change that could alter their lives permanently. Throughout the conversation, she maintained a respectful distance from intrusion, letting him process and respond at his own pace. She understood that true transformation required trust, patience, and dignity. This was not about control or assertion of power, but about partnership and recognition. As the meeting concluded, she offered a final piece of advice. "Remember, what you did today, a small act of selflessness, can create ripples beyond what you can imagine. Never underestimate the impact of integrity. It will follow you, guide you, and open doors when you least expect it." He nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest, a sense of hope he had not experienced in years. "I will remember," he said quietly, "and I will make sure she grows up knowing the importance of kindness too." The woman smiled, satisfied. "That is all I could ask." As they walked back toward the airport exit, the father held his daughter's hand tightly, feeling the future stretch before them like an open road. He felt grateful, humbled, and inspired all at once. The events of the day, the crowded gate, the first-class seat, the conversations, the offer had all converged into a moment of transformation. Outside, the city welcomed them with lights, movement, and opportunity. The father knew challenges would remain, but for the first time in a long time, he could face them with the knowledge that kindness, patience, and integrity were not just abstract ideals. They were forces capable of creating real, tangible change. Weeks later, he began his new role with the company. His daughter settled into a new school, surrounded by support and encouragement. The routine was different, more structured, and filled with opportunity. He watched her grow, learn, and smile in ways that had been difficult to imagine before. Each day reminded him of the importance of small choices, of the ripple effects of selfless acts, and the ways in which character could open doors that money or luck never could. The woman kept in contact, not to control or intervene, but to observe and encourage. She saw the difference that recognition and support could make when given to someone deserving. She had witnessed a simple act of kindness unfold into a profound change, validating her belief that character was the most valuable currency in life. The father never sought fame or recognition. He continued to live simply, focusing on providing, nurturing, and supporting his daughter. But now, with the security, opportunity, and trust he had been given, he could envision a life filled with hope and possibility. The small act of giving up a seat, something he had done instinctively and without thought of reward, had transformed his life and the life of the little girl he loved more than anything. And in quiet moments, as he watched his daughter laugh, explore, and grow, he remembered the pregnant woman on the plane, the silent observer who had recognized the power of integrity and kindness. He knew that what had begun as a fleeting act had become a foundation for a future. He could finally believe in that. It was a life reshaped by selflessness, guided by character, and brightened by the promise of new beginnings. And through it all, he carried the quiet truth that even the smallest gestures, made with genuine heart, could leave a lasting impact far greater than one could ever imagine.